Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be continuing our 2028 series. It's episode 2. We're talking about another B last name candidate, and that is none other than the senior senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker. Cory Booker ran for president in 2020. He served a couple of terms in the U.S. Senate. He's probably one of the better-known Democrats in Congress, and I've got a lot to say about him. So just give me 15 to 20 minutes of your time, and we will discuss him. We're going to rate him as a candidate, and we're going to talk about his strengths and weaknesses in this edition. So to understand Cory Booker, we're going to start with the beginning of his federal career. He was the mayor of Newark. He worked in local politics for a little bit. But in 2013, he won a special election in the U.S. Senate that was caused by the unfortunate death of Democratic Senator Frank Lautenberg. And Cory Booker, he won this race. It was a very low turnout race. It didn't get a lot of attention, but he won it by 11 points. And that was, at the time, a pretty decent showing for him. He was able to get good enough Democratic turnout in Democratic strongholds like Newark, his home city, as well as some other areas across the state. And it was, I would say, a pretty solid performance for him. The next year, 2014, it was a midterm. It was a good year for Republicans nationally, but Cory Booker held on pretty easily. He won by over 13%. Then in 2020, he won by his largest margin yet. He won by over 16 points in what was a pretty uncompetitive election. He outran Joe Biden by a little bit, and there were, I believe, a couple townships that Cory Booker notably won that Joe Biden did not. So there were people who in 2020 voted for Donald Trump as well as Cory Booker. And so since he's been elected to the U.S. Senate, Cory Booker's been a pretty visible Democrat. He has worked on, I'd say, a fair amount of legislation, and most notably, I think, just for his electoral prospects, he gave a remarkably long filibuster earlier this year that a lot of people speculated was kind of pinpointing the direction of running for president. The good press among people who lean left in this country, or I should say the positive attention, really, that people who lean left in this country gave to Booker, probably gave him a little bit of momentum early on. And for that reason, he I think not only has higher name recognition now, but is more likely to run and be competitive in a 2028 presidential primary. Now, speaking of presidential primaries, Cory Booker is no stranger to running in presidential primaries. If you go back to 2020, which was the last time we had a competitive Democratic presidential primary, Cory Booker stayed in that race for a little bit, didn't do all that well, as you can see at this time in 2020, so around 5 years ago, in this time 2019, so actually 6 years ago, Booker, it was from July 27th to 29th, so a little less than 6 years ago, Booker was polling at 0%. Now this Emerson poll, it's a little, it isn't amazing for him necessarily. It definitely wasn't generous. Some polls had him nationally at 1% to 2%, but he was never a front runner. He was never close to Joe Biden. He was never close to Sanders or Warren or even Kamala Harris or even Beto O'Rourke. But he was kind of in the middle of the pack. He wasn't, I would say, as much of a long shot as other candidates, like, say, Tim Ryan or like Marianne Williamson or like Jay Inslee. So he was, I wouldn't say it was a bad campaign, but it certainly wasn't competitive. And there was no point at which Booker seemed to have a real path or even a realistic shot at competing for the presidential primary. He was never close to being in the ballpark of Biden and Sanders, and he was not close to even being on the fringe at any given point. And I don't say that to criticize him or to say that he flamed out, because really, he was a senator from a blue state, and the 2019 and 2020 Democratic primary electorate was really focused on one thing and one thing only, and that was beating Donald Trump. And if you looked back at the debates from especially in early 2019, almost every single time a question was asked, who here can beat Donald Trump? And they'd ask specific candidates, why are you the best candidate to beat Donald Trump? Cory Booker was a Democrat from what was at the time a safe blue state. And just to be honest, when you're running against the former vice president, who was at the time quite popular, as well as some other people from more competitive states, it's hard to sell yourself on that issue. But the good news for Cory Booker, ironically, is that his state has gotten a lot redder since 2020. In the 2024 election, we saw Kamala Harris only win New Jersey by a little over 6%. And so that might direct some attention to New Jersey, which has previously, even back in 2020, in that election year, has really not been all that competitive. And so that not only will it work to Booker's advantage, but it'll give him a bit more attention as his state will be closer to the center of the political universe, or at least more relevant than it has been in quite some time. Now, I want to go back just to talk about why one reason I think Cory Booker's campaign failed, in addition to the fact that his state wasn't seen as being particularly important. He didn't have a coherent message. And I don't mean that to say that I don't think he had nothing to offer or that he was even bad at communicating. I'm going to rate Booker on my rubric in just a second here, and you're going to see I have some good things to say about his communication skills and his ability to be relatable. What I do think, though, was that if you think back to the 2019 and 2020 Democratic primaries, you can get a vision of the main candidates. Even Kamala Harris, who dropped out in November, who kind of ended, I would say she didn't end the way she wanted to. Even Kamala Harris had a pretty clear message. It was, we're fighting for the people. What was Joe Biden's message? It was, bring back the soul of the country. What was Bernie Sanders' message? One word, change. Elizabeth Warren, she's got a plan for that. You can think the big candidates, what were they running on? I don't know the answer to that for Cory Booker, and I think most voters didn't either. And so that's the big challenge for him going into 2028 if he wants to be competitive the way he was not in 2020. And I think he's got the toolkit to do it. He certainly has a number of things going for him that are going to help him communicate, help him message better, and potentially help him be more competitive. But in 2020, that's what I think he got wrong. And another thing, like I said, I think everyone knows, even like, and I'm not saying this as an endorsement of Booker, but I think he's a good speaker. I think he's clear, and I think he's emotional and relatable in a good way. But the issue that Cory Booker has or that he had really, I should say, is that back in 2020, he didn't have a good breakout debate moment. He didn't even have a Tulsi Gabbard moment, where Tulsi Gabbard, if you remember, was very critical of Kamala Harris in a way that went basically viral. Cory Booker didn't have that to any extent. And so that is something he's going to have to fix in 2028 if he wants to break out of the pack. So with that, we're going to look at our rubric. We graded Andy Beshear. He got a 6.45 out of 7, which is a tough act to follow. That's around 92% of all points possible. And I was very high on Beshear, I guess you could say. I gave him good scores, and you can go back and you can look at that video. It's in the new playlist I've created for this channel, and you can see the reasons that I was generous to Beshear in most categories, and you can compare it to this video. But regardless, I'm going to show you all the scores at once, and you're going to see Cory Booker does a bit worse than Andy Beshear. Let's go through it. Coalition building, this is a quarter of all points. Again, some categories are weighted more or less than others. But coalition building, does Cory Booker expand the tent? Does he broaden the appeal of the Democratic Party? Does he reach out to new or disaffected voters? Well, the answer to that is unclear. He's won impressive victories in New Jersey, but he hasn't gone so far as to win over Republicans in red states like Andy Beshear did, or has done, I should say. Sure, he's outran Joe Biden by a couple points, but that's expected from an incumbent senator running against a relatively unknown opponent. I don't think he's bad. I don't think that he would divide the party, that he would be unable to reach over to the other side of the aisle, or that he'd be unable to bring in voters who are disaffected, but there's no evidence of it. The only argument I can make in favor of it is that he's a good communicator, but we're going to talk about that later. So I'll give him a 5, but it's a generous 5. You could make the argument for a 4. Electoral value. This is another one that's very interesting to me. If you'd asked me this before the 2024 election, it would not have been a 5. It probably would have been a 3 or a 4. But as I mentioned, New Jersey, a bit more competitive nowadays. And in a 2028 election, Republicans might well target it. It's very possible that if Democrats run someone who doesn't appeal well to New Jersey, the state could outright flip. And that's not something you would have expected to say back in 2020 or even back in mid-2024. So it's important to keep your eye out for that. And it's important to really think about how that'll impact Booker's chances, not only in the primary, but in a general election. That'll help him. But nonetheless, does he have the same level of appeal to the other swing states? Does he bring out Democrats in the Rust Belt? Or is he more of a Sun Belt candidate who's going to win Georgia, win Arizona, Nevada, and be competitive in North Carolina? He certainly could be, but I don't think that he has great appeal to either the Rust Belt or the Sun Belt. He isn't from either region, really. He's kind of just from the East Coast. And more importantly, unlike Andy Beshear, who isn't from the Rust Belt, I guess I should say Andy Beshear is not from the Rust Belt, but he's able to kind of appeal to those voters because there's similar demographics, especially in working class parts of Kentucky. Booker doesn't have that. The closest thing would potentially be getting good urban turnout, but Democrats need that across the country. That isn't unique to just Arizona or to just Michigan or to just Pennsylvania. So he gets a 5 because he's from New Jersey and because I don't think that he would do horribly. But I do think that there are some questions to be answered about his ability to win Pennsylvania or to win Nevada. Now, narrative coherence. This one, I know some of you might not like out of 7, but I'm going to explain it. Now, my criteria here, it's really in the form of questions. It's, does Booker develop effective messaging? Does he reach out to different types of voters? Does he stay disciplined? Does he stay on the same message throughout the campaign? And does he display an ability to develop messages that appeal to more than one or two blocks of voters? Now, I criticize his 2020 bid for being unable to break out and for being unable to create a coherent message. But I never criticize his ability to stay on message. And this is a risky 7. You could argue it should be lower, but I think if Booker can create a message, he will be able to stay on it. Why? He gave a good Senate filibuster that energized people on his side of the political spectrum, and he was able to, within that, create meaning. He was able to, go viral. He was able to create good moments in that very long speech. And so I think that in this case, we can give him the benefit of the doubt. We know he's a good speaker. He can debate I would say in a broader context, in the sense that he's a good debater. He just needs to be able to find good moments, good kind of like lightning in a bottle, I suppose. And so I think he can stay on message. I think he can make a good narrative. He just has to be able to promote it effectively. He has to be able to speak loud enough so that everyone can hear. We're going to go down to charismatic sustainability. And I absolutely believe that he can energize a diverse range of voters throughout the country. I think Booker is absolutely charismatic. I think maybe even more so than Andy Beshear. I actually got a funny comment on my video about Beshear, and someone said he was milk toast, which is interesting. And you can definitely make that argument. And I think it's a fair criticism of Beshear, but Cory Booker is not milk toast. Cory Booker is energetic, and I think he comes off as passionate in a good way. I would say regardless of whether or not you are a Democrat or you are a Cory Booker supporter. And then record to run on, this is 10%. This one's a bit lower for me. I think that Democrats who are from deep blue states or states that are perceived as being deep blue, even if they're not, face a very big challenge in this political landscape. Often Democrats are kind of accused of being bad at governing, right? How many times have you heard the attack line like coastal elite, California liberal, New York City, Chicago, right? The perception among many Americans, especially those who are kind of in the middle, is that Democrats don't govern well, is that they don't run these big cities well, because Republicans have been attacking these big cities for years. And as the mayor of Newark and a senator from New Jersey, it might be difficult for Cory Booker to overcome that attack. I also think that even though he's given a good filibuster which could help in the primary, I don't know if there's a lot of legislation that he could tout as his own that would appeal to a broader swath of the American electorate. By and large, I don't think that he is super scandal plagued or that he's unelectable, but I do think that compared to other candidates who are maybe governors or have been longer serving senators, might be a bit less for Booker to talk about when he runs for president. Resource mobilization, I don't have a lot of concerns about this for Cory Booker. He is a decent fundraiser. I think the filibuster will help him get name recognition among the left wing of this country, and that could help him with some goodwill in terms of money come 2.5 years from now. And I think that he will be able to create or cultivate a good campaign, at least on the ground, based on what we've seen in New Jersey in his previous runs at a federal office. Then finally, battlefield experience and resilience. Now, we don't know, I think, how Cory Booker would do in a high-pressure rhetorical environment, because I think in 2020, he had limited exposure, right? And I think, in a way, that's a negative for him, because he didn't have like I said, he didn't have a breakout moment. He didn't have a moment that you can remember that defined his campaign the way other candidates did. So you can dock him for that. But he also didn't fold. There were a lot of moments in 2020 in those Democratic primary debates where candidates folded, where they were not able to look, or I really should just say that they didn't look good at all. I thought that the second Elizabeth Warren began to attack Michael Bloomberg in the February 2020 Democratic debate, Bloomberg's, chances at winning that nomination were done. Warren, I thought, crushed Bloomberg in that moment. Cory Booker never had that happen to him, but he was never on the other end of it either. So, that definitely keeps him higher, but I can't give him a 7, given that. So what's his overall score? When we adjust for weighting and we calculate our averages, it's about a 5.5 out of 7, which is notably lower than Andy Beshear. He's almost a full point lower on average than Beshear, actually. That's roughly 79%, which, by the way, 79% might sound like a bad score. It's a C+ in most American grading systems. But it's really, I don't mean to give it out like that. I think a 79% is a little harsh without the context. He's not getting a C plus. He's only earned 79% of the points. A lot of these things are unknown. Maybe Cory Booker will be really good at adjusting to high pressure rhetorical environments come 2028. Maybe he will expand the tent in ways that we don't know, and polls are going to show that next year. But for now, that's where he is. For now, he's only, to me, collected 79% of the points available. And so that basically summarizes what I think about Booker. He's got potential. He is clearly a candidate that I think is worth watching, who's going to be able to have maybe some good moments if he can get himself out there to voters. But he's also an unknown in another way. He didn't get enough attention in 2020. He didn't show an ability to kind of create that attention for himself. So for that reason, it's hard to say that he's a guaranteed breakout. That's why he doesn't score necessarily as high on my rubric. So that's what I think about him. Now, on the electoral map, it's going to be hard to create a clear path to victory for him. Obviously, we know he's going to win the states that were pretty decisive for Kamala Harris, just to kind of go ahead and fill these out. We're also going to give him states like New Hampshire and New Jersey, because those are states that are essentially prerequisites to any successful Democratic bid at the White House, as well as states like Virginia, Minnesota, and the district in Nebraska, of course. And then from here, it's tricky, because once he's winning New Jersey, once he's taking New Hampshire, the next state's hard to see. Now, I do think that Cory Booker, just in terms of upside and in terms of path to victory, would potentially give Democrats upside with black voters. In 2024, Kamala Harris, the raw numbers with black voters were decent, but turnout in some areas was down. For example, in the city of Philadelphia, turnout suffered. And so Cory Booker, in his runs for Senate in New Jersey, has gotten pretty good numbers among black voters. So I think that in states where Democrats really need black support, especially these four states here, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, that could be the path. But it's also important to note that a lot of this comes down to the suburbs. Democrats need, especially in a state like North Carolina, the suburbs to come out big for them. So I would say that Booker's path would probably run through Michigan, Pennsylvania, and then Georgia, just because those are the states that not only have pretty sizable black Democratic constituencies, but also because those are states where Democrats have been able to win a number of different ways, right? The path for Democrats in a state like Arizona runs through Maricopa County. The path for Democrats in North Carolina runs through black voters, as well as the suburbs and the Research Triangle. Whereas in Michigan, there's a number of ways you can win as a Democrat. And so I think given Cory Booker's versatility, to me, I think it's easier for him to win a state like Michigan or Georgia than it is for him to win a state like North Carolina. So that is Cory Booker's path. I think it's actually a bit more difficult than Beshear's, but nonetheless, it'll be interesting to see how this primary pans out. So please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you all in my next video.